Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nedra Fetterman and Ashok Gangadine.
Well, good morning. One thing you should know is there's these very bright lights shining in our eyes, and I really like looking at you. So I'm going to work very hard to do that despite the light. We have one announcement. Clive left his iPad at breakfast. So if anybody finds it, maybe bring it up here or bring it to the registration desk. So, Clive, wherever you are, do you want to identify yourself? There's Clive, right there. Oh, we found a match. We found a match. Well, how are you all doing before we get started? Yes, you're doing great? Yes. I want you to know I've been here since Tuesday, and I have had the most incredible conversations with people, both one-on-one, small groups, and this large group. I think it's been the most amazing conference I've ever been at. And just thank you to everybody who's made this possible. It's just amazing. Why don't you stand up? And I am really thrilled to have my beloved friend and colleague here to speak to all of you and to present. We're going to be presenting together. And I think I've been as excited for him to meet all of you as well as you to meet him. So, should I tell you about this group?
I'd love to learn more. I'm already picking up fantastic energy. This is a very special community.
Yes, it is. And I think, I've been talking to some of you about this. There's something about dialogue that creates space, spaciousness. And when we create space through the curiosity and openness and receptivity of dialogue, something shows up. And what shows up is joy and connection and love and safety. And so there's something, I think Sabrina kind of said it, there's something about this gathering that is really extraordinary. And I know you're a teacher of dialogue, and I'm a teacher of dialogue, and this group is amazing, brilliant, creative, playful, outrageously loving, and like you would say, these are your homies. You're at home here, so that's who they are. And do you want to say a little bit about who you are?
I'm Ashok, and I'm a philosopher. I've been teaching philosophy at Haverford College outside of Philadelphia. I'm in my 47th year of developing global philosophy, which is trying to really bring our great wisdom traditions together and to realize that they're deeply together. Can you hear me? You're right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
To bring our worlds together. We've been deeply divided. So my whole career has been to try to listen to the wisdom of our great teachers and follow their leads and their advice to go into the deepest mystery quest for the code of the fundamental field, which turns out to be a code of deep dialogue and relationships. And it shows who humans are more deeply than we realized, that we're dialogue beings. So that's been my life and my career. When I met Nedra, it was amazing. I didn't know about Imago. And a friend brokered and said, we've got to meet. And when I met her and we started to exchange, she is living the art of dialogue, and that's been my life. And I found a being who was present, who could listen, who could speak from a deep place. And we just ignited into a partnership. And we've been doing sanctuaries for deep dialogue. We call it a sanctuary because dialogue is sacred, And we need a safe haven to open up our hearts and minds, to really, and be vulnerable, to meet one another. So this is a very special being, so the feeling is mutual.
The feeling is mutual. I wanted to share with everybody what it was like when we first met. So a young man who works with my husband had a girlfriend, and the young man named John Paul, JP, and his girlfriend came to a Getting the Love You Want workshop. And they are now married. And 2 weeks after they came to the workshop, they attended one of Ashok's global dialogue forums. And he holds them at Haverford College and opens it up to the entire community. And sometimes you have 150 people there.
And more.
And more. And JP was in the crowd. And even though there was a guest speaker who was being honored, JP focused in on you. And he called me right away and he said, you've got to meet this man. It took us about a year to get together.
I met Joe first.
You met Joe first. I actually had the flu and couldn't go. You met Joe first. Joe came home and said, you've got to meet Ashok. It was the end of the Mayan calendar was coming. And I said to myself, I have to meet Ashok before the end of the Mayan calendar. So it was, I remember the date. It was December 14th, 2012. And we, unfortunately, were in a very crowded and noisy restaurant. And so all I really remember from that night was you were wearing a hat. Do you remember you were wearing a hat? Mm-hmm. And I remembered his warm smile. He was very playful, and he said one sentence to me that I'll never forget. He looked at me and he said, we are dialogue beings. Now, these light bulb moments we have when things kind of, oh, that's the light bulb moment. Sometimes it's like the funniest little sentence where everything will kind of coalesce and you have this new awareness. So I don't know if that sentence, we are dialogue beings, would do it for you, but for me, what it said, it kind of came together because in Imago, our very first premise is we are essentially energy, and that energy pulsates, and that a wound is a disturbance in the energy. And what came together for me when he said we are dialogue beings is that the energy is in dialogue, that pulsation is a dialogue, which means the whole structure of reality that we live in is in dialogue. And suddenly my world opened up and changed, realizing that everything, it's not just the interpersonal between me and the other in dialogue, it's everything is in dialogue. Now, I don't know for you whether this is a new idea, but suddenly I remembered what Joseph Campbell said. And Joseph Campbell said, the goal of life, and that's big, the goal of life is to match your heartbeat with the rhythm of nature, and to match your nature with the nature of the universe. And so Joseph Campbell is saying what you're saying, that the universe is in dialogue, the heartbeat is a dialogue, the breath with the inhale and the exhale is a dialogue, the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system are in dialogue, they speak to each other. Suddenly, everything changed. And it was because you said to me, we are dialogue beings. So that was very significant for me. And so what I'm hoping will happen today is that Ashok will talk about what he means by deep dialogue. And then we're going to talk about the shift from monologue to dialogue and how that shift happens developmentally. And then we also want to talk about why that shift is crucial for the future of the world. Do you want to add anything to what I've said?
It's beautiful. You set the stage very well. And whenever you're ready, I'd like to just start. It's improvisational. I mean, deep dialogue is the art, as you know. You're all dialogue beings and artists, and dialogue is in the moment. It's improvisational. It's extemporaneous. So we are jazzing or seeking to jazz, and with you. So that this very event is a dialogue, energy flow amongst us. And did you want to talk about the way we are here?
About the space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very sensitive to space. Whenever I'm leading a dialogue event, I notice, the feng shui of the room, and the linear, the rows, and rather than a curvature where we can just
Be embraced, yes.
I'm feeling it, and I was almost.
Yeah, so I thought in the spirit of co-creating space, we would actually co-create the space. And the invitation is to move your chairs. So if you want to move closer, move your chairs closer. If you want to turn your chairs so you're not craning your necks for those people on the edge, turn your chairs.
A little curvature.
And you guys can move up. Yes, come closer. Yes. What was that? That would be great, yeah.
The song is past, and the safe song, you didn't want to start with that now, right?
No,
we're on.
Yeah.
Maybe we might end at the end or something like that, because I think now that we have your attention.
You can't hear us? Neither of us?
Can you hear me? Down more? Can you hear me now? Is that better? Yeah, can you hear me? So I'm just going to go for it.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Good opening.
So I'm going to just stop you and mirror you. As it makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay.
If you can you hear me now? Or do I need to raise my voice? In the back? Can you hear me?
Turn it up. We're getting some information that they can't hear us. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Can you hear Ashok?
Can you hear me? Can't hear me. Is it closer? Is that better? I can't.
Okay. Here comes help. Oh, it's right here.
Oh, there's a cordless?
Oh, does he want you to hold the mic? Is that okay?
No, it's okay. Hello, can you hear me? How's that? Can you hear me? Hello? Now you can hear me. Is this one off? Okay. The desirability of the clip-on, of course, is I'm going to be putting up a PowerPoint on the flip chart, and I'll have to juggle this way, but we'll do it. This has happened in the past. So if you don't hear me in the back, just raise your hand, and I'll hold it a little closer. So what I'm going to do, again, this, even though I've been a professor for my 47th year, this is not a lecture. I'm a recovered academic. This is a meditation. This is a deep dialogue moment. We're not talking about dialogue. We're invoking it. It's already here. And this community is amazing. The energy I'm picking up, meeting shining individuals and beautiful souls. That you're dialogue artists, and I can go very fast. I've made keynotes around the planet at all kinds of events and cities, and this is a very special gathering. And we're at a very special moment in our evolution. We know we have crises on the planet of all kinds, breakdown of relationships between cultures and religions and worlds, broken civic society where we're not really we the people, raising our children, objectifying one another. It's in every aspect of our lives. So this is really urgent to really understand in a deeper diagnosis. The wisdom of the planet converges in seeing that we're dialogue beings, and the greatest call of all of our wisdom keepers and teachers and pioneers all through the ages Abraham, Moses, Socrates, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Krishna, Lao Tzu, all the wonderful Sophias who embodied this wisdom on the planet. I'm a philosophia, I'm a philosopher, lover of Sophia. And Sophia is wisdom. And wisdom is deep dialogue. So what I want to do, very briefly, and I can go very fast, Nedra, here, in terms of just putting up a calligraphy. Think of it not as information. You'll see why. When you lecture, you're giving information, and dialogue is trans-informational. It's opening the heart and mind to surf the primal field of reality that all of our great wisdom teachers and scriptures have been calling us to. And it's deep science. It's called first philosophy, a term from Aristotle. But all of our great first narratives are getting to what is first. And so what I want to do with this visual, to create a living PowerPoint, to try and capture in a picture 3,000 years of the emergence of our wisdom and deep dialogue intelligence, in just one visual, in quest of the going deeper into the missing code that all of our geniuses through the centuries have been opening up and pioneering with the highest urgency to get the missing code of Logosophia. I'm using Logosophia for the name for the fundamental reality or field. And just a gesture. When you step back from whatever lens we have in our culture and our lives, we're raised in our culture, it's a language, it's a mental space, it's a mental ecology, and we develop a lens, so to speak, of the mind that shows us in a screen of our awareness all of our information, all of our mental states, all our beliefs, and our worldview, and our experience, and our culture. It all happens in that mental space. And when we step back from whatever lens we have and dare to dilate into the more expansive space across the planet and inventory, look at our great teachers, something astounding begins to emerge that you couldn't see before as easily from a more comfortable local cultural lens that we're raised in, which can be highly complex with multiple worlds. We'll get to that in a moment. I'm just trying to give you a quick trailer of what my talk will be. So if you go into the classical Chinese mind, the Tao, Lao Tzu, the Tao that is named is not the Tao. Inviting us to go deeper into the fundamental name, the infinite force, the infinite source of all life, of all words, of all languages, of all realities, the Tao. Om. Meditate on Om. The form of all forms. All realities comes from Om. It didn't say predicate on Om, which is what we do, to predicate. The heart of logic, trying to understand. Logic is trying to get the DNA for consciousness. The grammar, the language of consciousness is logic. And ontology, these are the fields I was raised in. Ontos from the Greek is being. And ontos logos is a science, the grammar, the code, the script of reality, of being. And logic, logos science, and ontos, ontology, meet. Because if you can get the code of consciousness, you'll have the secret code for the fundamental reality. And everything comes from that. So that if you could understand the Om code and realize that where we're speaking in everyday culture, magnificent as it is, human development, we reached a point where we finally saw that, as Aristotle would say, to think is to predicate. And I hope you can see this. Yeah. We join pieces of information, subjects and predicates, and this is the deep science of thinking, consciousness. Socrates is wise. Rain isn't falling. We are in DC. I am a man. I am a teacher. Whatever it is, we're predicating and joining pieces of information. And this is whatever happened to lead us to this stage of development where we have the information. To think is to have this, and all our belief system. I believe the sun is shining. I am cold. I am hungry. It's all predication. So the mental states, our inner psychology, the mental states, the description of the world, our worldview is all being presented in the state of predication. To join. It's a miracle. I mean, logic was discovered and broke, for example, by Aristotle. He saw that when we predicate, if I say every S is M and all M is P and all S is P, he saw that logic is a calculus of the mind and the art of predication. So predication is huge. But our geniuses are seeing the Tao that is named in predication is not the Tao. Yahweh, do not write the name. Somehow, if you write it in this stage of development of language and consciousness and psyche, you violate the infinite force of that name. You make it finite, you put it in the box, you name it and you give it identity, and unwittingly, or perhaps wittingly, by naming it and taming it and locating it here, you defame it, you deform it, you violate it. It's a form of violence to what is first. So meditate on Om. Meditation is a different technology of scripting, not predicating. So just going very quickly, I'm accelerating. Yahweh, love me, place me first, calling out to Israel and to all people. What is first must be honored as first. And Abraham's deep struggle for all humanity was to listen in a dialogue with that voice. We're in dialogue with the force that's calling us. And he had to listen for all humanity. So the amazing dialogue, when Socrates is drinking hemlock in the prison to die, there's a dialogue that Plato brought out of that moment. The highest form of teaching to come into the Logos is dialogue. When Moses is at the burning bush, he's having a dialogue with the infinite to bring the laws, to the code to humanity. Whom shall I say sent me? I am that I am. It can't be stated here.
That you're saying. Oh, yeah. Can they hear me?
You want a dialogue?
I do, because this little diagram here took me a long time to understand. Predication
Can you
was...
hear?
Oh. They're going to turn me up. Can you hear me now? When I first heard Ashok present this, and I don't know if this is true for many of you, I didn't know what predication was. And as I got to know Ashok, and he talked about that we are dialogue beings and the structure of realities in dialogue, you talked about the structure of reality being an I-thou reality. And that when we predicate, which means when we say, I am a woman, or Socrates is wise, we start putting ourselves in a box, and we tend, through our language, to objectify ourselves. And I hope to show you a video at the end of this time, a very beautiful illustration of a young man predicating himself, objectifying himself, and then breaking free out of that into more of the state of just I am. And that's the beingness, the I am state. So I just want to underscore that, because when you first started teaching this, this was so important to me to understand how we predicate ourselves and then objectify ourselves and make ourselves objects.
Thank you so much for helping to breathe that moment. That's huge. I mean, what this is leading up to in this drama is that when you step back and go into the global space where all of these first names are coming out, it's Allah, it's Om, it's Brahman, it's, Shunyata, Buddha's great breakthrough of enlightenment. They're all urgent medicine. Buddha is a medicine person trying to end the suffering of humanity. And what you're pointing out rightly, this is headline news. Most people go through their lives and don't realize I'm predicating. What does that mean? It means that, may I just step over here a moment?
Oh, sure.
That the thinker, this is my screen. I locate myself at a certain point without knowing. I have somehow, there's a line that's been drawn. When I start using this technology, there's a breach that has taken place with the fundamental field that is sourcing everything. And this is a huge issue. And when you start using this technology, as great as it is to have information and content, when it's desourced, something dysfunctional happens in the human being and in culture and in every aspect of life, and we don't realize it. And what Nedra just beautifully points out is when I'm predicating, so to speak, I'm predicating myself. And here the subject is thinking. I am the subject who thinks. This is thought and psyche and consciousness, beliefs. And that is what I'm thinking about. That's an object. And this line is important. I and it. And when we make ourselves a bundle of predicates, and that is my ID, and that is my being, you have somehow, almost irreparably with this technology, cut yourself off from the source. And the genius is saying, when you desource, you suffer. Buddha's enlightenment is on this very point. All of yoga is on this point. The sacrifice and breakthrough of Jesus is on this point. Socrates, let's get out of the cave, is on this point. It's unbelievable what you begin to hear when you step back and listen to echoes of these great teachers who want to get to first. This is where we become human. This is the place of dialogue. I, thou, the other. When we step in relationships here, the two languages that were not seen. These two spaces were conflated in the same cultural space. The two files, the two dimensions of intelligence and language and literacy were in the same space for centuries. And our teachers are teaching us and saying, upscript, and we keep downloading. And it's very serious because it's a huge crisis, because this is a space of objectification of one another, of our children, of nature, of our relationships. We can't be in genuine, intimate, deep relationships and be truly human in this technology of consciousness we usually don't know we're using because we just are it. It allows us to see and believe and to think, so it's hard to think our way out of it.
One thing, when I showed Ashok the still face experiment, I don't think you had ever seen it. Ashok is not a psychologist, not a therapist, philosopher. And he was devastated, and then he looked at me and he said, you know, we live in a still face culture. And that really hit me. You know, as psychologists and therapists and clinicians, we're so focused on the interpersonal. And what I love about this notion of dialogue being more than just the interpersonal, it's the internal rupture. It's the rupture between cultures. It's the rupture between the self, the relationship, and the culture. It's the rupture with us and the planet because we're not in dialogue with Earth, with nature, with the ecology. And you're also talking about the rupture with the sacred field. So with all those points of contact, self, other, Earth, ecology, cross-culturally, with the sacred, and even with our bodies. There's a dialogue with our bodies we get cut off from and ruptured from. We need to be in dialogue in all those relational fields. So I hope, can you just give me a sense of whether you're with us and you're getting this? Oh, great. Oh, good. Thank you. Good.
Thanks, Nedra. So to continue to be, we're jazzing here, as you can see. The trailer I'm trying to help us see, and the astounding, this reason for hope, is that why our great, deepest visionaries in seeing the trail, the journey of being a human, when we say we're dialogue beings, it's not here. This is monologue. Because the lens that I have, whatever worldview or worldviews, I'm going to use a single stroke to mark the consciousness and the location of the predicator, the human who is a predicator. An ego sapien, not yet a logo sapien. An ego sapien. We're not monologue beings, we're dialogue beings. That's huge. It means that if we can somehow cross, and this is the journey of all of our great teachings, yoga, when Arjuna breaks down in the Bhagavad Gita, his life collapses in a midlife crisis. He doesn't understand why in a fratricidal war. He drops his weapon and says, I can't kill my own folks. Krishna, help me. And Krishna is the voice of Om. A dialogue begins. The Gita is a deep dialogue between Krishna, the voice of Om, the field, dialoguing with Arjuna. It's almost like his high self that's been lost is waking up at that crisis moment to dialogue with him, to guide him, to find a higher ethic, and to come to a higher human state. Because that's samsara in the East. When you're in this technology, you're cut off. And it repeats itself on and on, generation of. If we're having fear of the Ebola virus, how about the Egola virus? That's transmitted culturally, generation after generation. It's not funny. I'm kidding. I mean, in other words, see it as a mind infection. Buddha's awakening is on this point. Buddha was a Hindu prince. He saw humans are suffering, not just in terms of poverty and disease, but human existential suffering. A loss of meaning, nihilism, facing absurdity, breakdown of life forms, collapses of worlds. That's human suffering. Why? Buddha's insight, this technology is dominating our lives, is holding us captive, and we have to somehow kick the habits. It's an addiction. It's an addictive pattern. It's a vice. So Buddha, as a healer, said, I'm not here to give you a theory, which is going to be, let me give you a narrative and talk about it. So when Buddha came out of his great austerity and meditations and was enlightened, he distilled it to 4 axioms. And they were not predications. They were deep formulas of transformation of Buddha medicine into the Dharma, of interaction where everything is flowing in relationship. Again, interrelationality. That was his insight. This is disrelational. This objectifies. Everything is an object, and you can't be a human. Because all our great moral teachers says, never treat a person as an object. And it's best you try, if you're using this mental calculus to make yourself and your world and your relationships, you're treating each other as objects. And Buddha's great breakthrough was to say, we are not things, we are not beings, we're not entities, we are energy flow, as you're saying, rightly. And one thing I really admire about Imago and Harville, hi Harville, was to see relationships have to preside. Couples are not just a couple of 2 different atoms. Here's one and here's B, and now let's relate them. Buddha saw, give that up. There are no atoms, there are no separate, because an atom in philosophy is a unit of being that is self-sourced. So when you say I and your ego eyes yourself, and make yourself an entity, you're atomizing yourself. But there are no atoms. Everything is anatomic. Reality is anatomic. Imagine what that means. Relationships are on the ground floor, and things arise out of relationships. It's not that we have things and then you relate them. It's that if you enter the Buddha zone, everything co-arises in energy together. And that's compassion. And that's the space of deep dialogue. I'm just giving you major headline news of the centuries. So Buddha's essential message, before you...
No.
Existence is suffering. And think, these are axioms from this language, not from here. You can't predicate them because this is the problem. Existence is suffering, unawakened existence. It has a cause, a second noble truth, science, medical diagnosis. It has a cause, clinging to this mental processing, clinging to this state of evolution. It's adolescent, it's dysfunctional. To talk about it breaks it, and we can kick the habit. The third noble truth is we have a choice. We don't have to be thus addicted. We have a choice in our mental processing, like a different word processing, like you have ego word and you have Buddha word. Ego word and Jesus word. Ego word and yoga word. Ego word and Socrates logos word. It's huge, right? And if you begin to see that, whoa, we're not paying attention to the mind operating process that's dominating our cultures across the planet. It's not just east or it's not west, it's east, west, north, and south. It's equal opportunity, evolutionary moment. And it's innocent. I mean, to talk about things and describe them and have the information and to communicate that in your education and to your children and to instill in them the literacy that we have is, in a way, innocent. But the geniuses are saying it's dangerous if we don't wake up to it and see that it's an adolescent stage of a development. And we're being called to be logosapiens. What is that? An awakened dialogue being. Which means what? That we are out of relation. We are in relation. We are relational beings.
Yes, thank you. When you talked about we're not atoms, and that Harville's great breakthrough insight was that the self emerges out of the relationship.
I heard that the couple is the unit.
The couple is the unit. You and I have had many conversations about separateness as an illusion. And that's one of the basic premises of Imago. And you gave me a metaphor that was very helpful that I wanted to share. And I don't know if you remember this, but you asked me to imagine a mountain range. And I remember imagining the Green Mountains in Vermont. And you said, and when you look at that mountain range, do you see the valleys? And I said, yes. And you said, well, you can point to the valley and you can point to the mountain. But where does the mountain end and the valley start? And where does the valley end and the mountain start? It's a flow. They're separate. You can point to it like there's two separate things.
You can name it here with an identity tag.
And yet they co-arise. They're giving form and shape to each other. They are profoundly connected. And for me, that was a very helpful metaphor in terms of understanding what we mean when we say separation is an illusion.
Well, I was going to get that in a moment. This is very helpful. Thank you for that, Nedra. I'm still giving you the overview, cryptically, of 3,000 years of evolution, of the most important moment in the quest for this code, the code here. Right? There was not even a name, a common name for this deep dimension. Whether you call it Yahweh, Om, Allah, Shunyata, Buddha calls it emptiness. He saw that the ineluctable and deeply entrenched mental virus of predicating it and talking about it, including his noble truths, and talking about the Buddha as if he were a subject upon which we can predicate, that would happen. So the stricture was, to cross this line, it's empty of all of this. None of these names can cross. They burn up when they go into the zone. I'm calling this a zone. I use that with my students. When they're coming to study Buddha's philosophy or yoga, the Gita, or to understand Socrates saying we must leave the cave and come into the rational light to be a human. Know thyself above all. All of these great callings. Jesus, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you fed me. He's speaking pure logos script. So what I began to see over the decades of my work as a logician and ontologist is there's a deep logic across borders going on here. They're onto something profound as the code for being human, and they're noticing something amazing, that we're across borders using this technology, whatever story you have in the box, and it varies dramatically across the planet. And Nedra, one of the things you see is that I don't have just one lens necessarily. There are different worldviews competing for this space of meaning and truth. This is where experience is happening. So if I'm a believer in the Bible, this is one of me. God created the universe. I believe it. Genesis is true. I'm living that. And that's one story. I'm also a scientist, a physicist, and I know the evidence shows it's a Big Bang. That's how it began. And I have another me as a physicist. That's another personality I have, because I hope you realize that when you have a different worldview, worldviews are profoundly diverse. What makes sense in one mental process, one worldview, does not make sense in another. It's a language system of its own. So when you cross worlds, if you can, that's the problem, the crash of worlds in a monologue space. If you go into say, I'm a civic American, and I want to keep my religion out of my political life. And I'm beginning to feel the stress of these different worlds on me. And of course, I began to see my Imago therapist, and I'm in therapy here, trying to sort out the multiple stresses in my own inner breakdown of dialogue. This is huge. I can have multiple lenses. So I'm chanting Om and doing yoga. And it's ego-based yoga, which is not yoga. The first premise of yoga is the quieting of predication. Yoga is cessation of this technology.
Yes, and so in Imago, the quieting of the predication is when we move into the receiver role. Yeah. And the receiver cultivates curiosity, openness, empathy, connection, and quiets the mind, sets it aside.
Thank you. And already you should be in the 7 stages of deep dialogue, which is a meditation. Is going to really take us through what happens to the human being, the psyche, when he, she, whatever lens or lenses you have, begins to encounter the other for the first time. And you realize, oh my God, I've been using my lens to listen to the other. That's monologue. If you get 2 different, multiple worlds, I'm a Jew, you're a Christian, I'm a Muslim, you're an atheist, you're a scientist, and we're meeting and having dialogue. and we know our truth, we know our story, and it's huge, all of these different worlds trying to talk and communicate. It's monologue because we tend to hold our lens, because it's what we know. That's how I see the world. That's my truth. That's my being. That's my ID. Don't ask me to budge from that. And I won't. I know that Jesus is my Lord. I know that Allah is true. I know that Yahweh is first. Right? And we compete for those spaces because this is where the culture says, this is real, this is true. This is meaning and truth. And it's an intense battle for which narrative is going to preside here. So we don't genuinely get out of our lens, we listen to the other with our own lens, and that's monologue. Dialogue begins, the 7 stages, and the Nedra really resonates with this, is when you, for the first time, say it's a couple's, and we know that women from Venus and men are from Mars. They're just missing it, right? And you're trying to get them to dialogue, right? And dialogue means through the logos. Dialogue means dialogos. It doesn't mean 2 people talking. It means open up to the logos and meet one another.
That is so important. Does that make sense to people? That something really extraordinary happens in Imago when we're willing to set aside our lens and really open to the other, and so you are dialogos. It's like calling in something bigger than us.
Entering the source.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah?
Yeah, well, I love all the stages, and I know you have a copy of it. And stage 1, we talk a lot about stage 1. A lot of people aren't even in stage 1 because they don't recognize there is another. There's simply the projection of their own worlds and their own lenses onto another, which is annihilating. So having somebody enter stage 1 and say, there is another. It's the encounter with the radical difference that interrupts habitual frameworks. And the decision is made, do I go forward and engage with the other, which could be uncertain and scary, or do I hesitate and pull back? And that's stage 1. And I think as Imago therapists, we're very familiar with stage 1 in our offices, where that decision is made by the couple. Am I really going to engage with that other world and even recognize there's another world, or is it too frightening? And I pull back and shut down or avoid, or try to control and change.
Thank you. So yes, we're, again, as we keep lacing this together, again, just to finish the trailer, I began to see as a philosopher over the decades that as I listened to the great teachers in scriptures, I began to see that they were urging us to listen and upscript into this literacy of dialogue and to step back from fixating our lens because we deform ourselves as a monologue being or an ego sapien. So monologue, the human here is in monologue with a mono lens, even if it may be complex and multiple. Our worlds are divided, and what makes sense here does not make sense there. The inner psyche can be living in multiple worlds at the same time and not able to have inner dialogue. Not only not a touch or shadow self and our collective preconscious, but the multiple scripts I'm living will give me multiple identities. It's normal schizophrenia in ontology. And the point about the atom, what goes on in this technology is as deep as the fall in the biblical story. When we're in Eden and the command, don't eat that fruit. The fruit of knowledge, not the tree of wisdom, but the fruit of knowledge. To eat that fruit is to fall. This is the fall. This is the deep wound and cut from the field of flow. And in the West, whether you call it sin, I'm just saying sin is worse than we thought from an ontological point of view. It's not just me bad. It is a fall of disconnection into a technology of objectification that works on the principle of identity. Perhaps you never got that. What is dominating and holding us here? The simple, powerful law, allegedly, A is A. A thing, you give it a name, it has what it is. Pen is pen, floor is floor, shirt is shirt, whatever it is, you name it, And it's an innocent and powerful technology, the law of identity, A-Z. But I began to see that when you have the pen here and you're predicating the pen, for example, as we do ourselves, it's a piece of plastic, it's for writing, it's disposable, we can throw it away. Do I dare put it into the field and the source and see the source pen? What would happen then? If this is the infinite space, the fundamental field is infinite. I want to really follow through on this for a moment. The pen, every point in this space is connected with every other point. That is the deep insight of relational flow that all of the geniuses are saying. And if you touch that, you have to get the tools and technology to handle the deep. So Buddha's fourth noble truth, to finish that, is not only we have a choice, but here's how. And he was doing his Imago therapy, right? 24/7, practice mindfulness in everything you do. In your action, in your judgments, in your perception, every act, mindfulness. Because when you're mindful, you're stepping out of this space and this lens, and you're rehabilitating the mind. It's trans-hab. Ethics is habit, and this is a vice. And when you get to virtue, a virtue is a virtuoso, and virtue means excellence, and excellence is good. And when you're gooding, you're in the Dharma. And when you're in the Dharma, you're in compassion. And when you're in the compassion, you see yourself in the other, because relationship is first. And you come out of the relation of co-arising. And when you experience that, you see you and that other are not severed in an atomic separate. So the fall is the disgrace of alleging or arrogating that I can be my own separate being. I've got my space. I'm on Facebook, right? That's an atom. An atom is arrogant because it's presuming it dares to step outside of the infinite field. Now, this is what I'm doing. I began to see, why haven't we seen, after all of these thousands of years, of a call of our great scriptures and wisdom that we allegedly revere, that we are still dominated here, when this has been the main call of our teachings to upscript and become human? Why are we still dominated by that? By the technologies of monologue. And I began to see that these two levels of consciousness and language and culture and self-making were conflated in the same space. We're predicating it all the time. When Jesus is speaking and saying, I am the way, I am the truth. When I was in prison, he's speaking the I, thou. This is the I, thou. This and the other arise together. It's anatomic. It's not atomic. The atom alleges to be, I got my space. But the gross philosophical ignorance is that if you could pull that off as an ego and step outside of the infinite field, you would demote the infinite and make it finite. Think about it. All of the geniuses on the ground floor, it's boundless, and it's transfinite, it's infinite. If you understand that, the elementary literacy is, it's got to be one. I can't say, I've got my infinite, I've got Yahweh. Oh, you've got Allah? Oh, I've got Brahman. Oh, well, I've got Shunyata. That's nonsense, because the infinite cannot be separated. Because if there were an other, more than one, it would be limited. So it's got to be one. How one? Infinite one, not one here, but infinite one. And if it's infinite one, it's infinite in power of names, infinite narratives. It's sourcing all. And if you follow the logic, it leads to saying, oh my God, OMG. And I'm using double brackets. I'm using double brackets. I said, what led me along that 20 years ago I saw in helping my students encounter these teachings, and they were struggling, and many of them are gifted athletes and musicians. And I say, okay, you've been in the zone when you were running. At one day, I am running. You were predicating yourself as a runner, but one day you were the running. You were in nature, and you just were blissing in the peak moment. You outran the ego. You outran this mental operating, and you were zoning. The zoning language, I use double parentheses for it. It's an example of tapping the zone, because it's always with us. We never can step outside of the zone. We live in the zone, the infinite space, by whatever name we use. I use the name Logosophia to just be one candidate for whether you're calling it Om or Yahweh or Allah or nature or whatever word you have for the fundamental field. that it's first, it's relational flow. Everything is woven. And so what Nedra was saying at the beginning is that everything is pulsating with that vibe, and that's when a human shows up, if you dare. And you need the technology, the mind operating process. You need the software. Ego software is not good enough. It's adolescent. It breaks. It's good. We don't want to give it up. And we don't want to drop the ego. So I'm going to turn the page, because this is awfully messy.
We need to bring it.
Yes.
But I thought one way to illustrate concretely what you're talking about is the story of Matt Harding. So I don't know if this is a good time or you want to finish.
Yeah, let me just finish the trailer. I'm just sharing a trailer. Okay. We'll never get to the movie this time. But I hope you're following the sentiment of what I'm doing. To me, the most important moment now, and this is where the Imago community is right at the cusp of the edge to see that relationship is huge. You're all devotees of relationship. I'm trying to show that the wisdom is with you, the force is with you. Because on the ground floor of reality, the source is the infinite flow of connectivity. And we as a culture are still, this is where I want to wrap it up, that to the extent that we're still dominated by this technology, we're not free, mature human beings. It's a stage of development. We don't have to disrespect that. We should respect it. I'm writing a movie script right now. I shared it with Nedra and a few others. Imagine Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Buddha and Socrates and Krishna and Lao Tzu, for example, gathering in Washington, D.C. Just a thought of that. Imagine they're saying, we have a millennial convocation to visit and come and see and look at our homies and see how well have we done in hearing our call to the people. Where are we now? That's going to be in the movie. You can imagine that moment when they all come together. There's a lot of light coming out of that. You know? So the point I'm making is that I saw that the most important tool we need to help our culture and our kids and our therapists and our educators is to see the difference between this language, which I use, when you're here, I use double parentheses. When you're here, I use a single marker, like X, whatever the word is. Pen, check out the pen, because when you go into the infinite space, every point is interconnected with every other point in this field. That's the strange logic of the field. That's why at Blake, there's infinity in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour when you cross into this. Everything is linked. The self and the other are linked, the self and the environment. But if we're using this I-it way and dominating and raising our kids and putting our kids in this technology, what are we doing to them? They're logosapiens, they're sacred beings. This is sacred space. And when we realize that we are always already in the field, we realize the geniuses saw you couldn't predicate, you couldn't have identity without the source. Why? Because the glue, the relational connectivity comes from the source. That's relation flow. But here in this space, it's broken into separate pieces. The technology of identity gives every name tag, everything, and you put it together, space and time, and color, figure, texture, motion, every word has its ID. And you put these bundles together in an artificial bundle, calling it yourself, and you live that way, and it's a dysfunctional life.
Yes. So let me,
yes.
let me give you the example, because we're running out of time, of a young man named Matt Harding. And his YouTubes have been seen by 40 million people. So I don't know how many of you are of the 40 million people who have seen it, but I want to tell you the backstory of his video. If you go to his website, on his website he says, I am a 38-year-old deadbeat from Connecticut. That's what we mean by predication. He has looked at himself, objectified himself, and called himself a deadbeat. He then goes on to say that he was a mediocre student in high school and never went to college, and that he envisioned himself for the rest of his life playing video games and designing them. So he finished high school. He got a job in Southern California designing video games. He was very successful at it. One day, he's sitting around in the cafeteria at work, shooting the breeze, and he says jokingly, "Let's create a game called Destroy All Humans." He was kidding. The company took him seriously and created that game and gave him a credit. When that happened, he was horrified and left. He quit. He didn't know what to do with himself, so he traveled around the world with a friend. And everywhere he went on his first trip, the friend took a video of him dancing. He was known for dancing a little jig. Evelyn has seen this. And he would dance a little jig in every country where he found a statue or a monument or historic landmark. That video that was made from that trip went viral and was seen by 1 million people. The chewing gum company, Stride, saw that video and decided to sponsor his next trip. So he decided to do the whole trip again. However, something happened. When he went to Rwanda, there were no statues, there were no monuments, there were no historic landmarks. And he went into a village, found 2 little boys who began making a relationship with him, and they danced with him. As a result, this is a stage 1 encounter. It disrupted his habitual framework. I have chills telling you about it. It disrupted his habitual framework of dancing with statues. He danced with these 2 little boys. He engaged, he attuned himself to them, he felt their world, he got into their rhythm, he began pulsating with these 2 probably gorgeous little boys. We know what little children are like, so open, so present. And so this is now stage 2 and stage 3 and stage 4 of Ashok's 7 stages, which I think is a real contribution to Imago theory, is to understand that there's stages of development we go through from monologue to dialogue. So this is a young man in monologue, predicating himself, being a video game designer, and then dancing with statues. As a result of engaging and dancing, and this is stage 2, 3, and 4. In stage 4, he comes back to himself, different. So we see this in therapy. You cross the world of the other, but eventually you come back to yourself, and you're expanded, and you can't forget the other. The other stays with you, and you're different. And then stage 5 is very interesting. Stage 5, there's actually, I think of it as when we cross the world to the other, it's a horizontal movement, but then when we come back to ourselves, it's vertical. And stage 5 really describes the vertical movement, the radical inner transformation. And what happens for Matt in stage 5 is he says to himself, people are more interesting than statues. We don't need to be so scared of other people. And he has the thought, I'm more capable than I thought. I know what I need to do next. I want to go around the world again. There's something in repetition, doing this again and again, that is helping me learn something. And so what he does, somewhere in this time zone, he and his girlfriend, he gets a girlfriend, they have a baby, so the next trip is a little longer. He funds it himself. And he says, this time I'm going to 50 countries, 70 locations, and I'm going to dance with people. And so the video I'd like to show you is Matt dancing with people around the world. And what we really see is the transformation of somebody who was pre-stage 1, in more avoidance, in more self-absorption, to somebody who explodes into interconnectedness and joyful aliveness. So how many of you have seen this video? What's the name of it? What's his name? His name is Matt Harding, and this video is called Where in the Hell is Matt? He wrote the words to the song with someone named, I think, Alice Lemke. But the words themselves are beautiful, and they go something like this. We've got to trip the light and see with new eyes. Anyway, I don't have the words memorized, but you'll get it as you listen to the video. Is there anything you want to say before we do? Let's do this.
Now?
Yeah.
I would like to say something.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, I'd like to say Can you hear me? Summing up this trailer, you could see that, there's so much here that I've not been able to bring out. But the single bracket and the double bracket as markers of the mind for the culture to realize when we're here and to listen to this language and not to downscript it, but to realize the pathway for our development is from moving from this technology of culture and consciousness and self-making and the psyche to upscript into the place of connectivity and relation and flow, the call of our great geniuses and scriptures of enlightenment. And we go from ego sapien to logo sapien, and that's when we mature. This is the noble place of ethics. It's the places of intimacy. Imagine our sexuality here or here, where we objectify each other, encountering our bodies. This is the yoga of yoga. This is the Christ of Christ. This is the place of democracy. Because if our civic space is dominated by this and broken in a multicultural, across-the-board local circles of difference and dissonance, there is no we the people. So that if America is here, for example, the democratic space, the upscript and opening of that space of dialogue, where real democracy and diversity can celebrate, because this field is filled with boundless deep diversity, in connection, pluribus unum, the unity in multiplicity. We need this intelligence. So I see the Imago adventure as leading the way to bring dialogue to life in every aspect of our lives. If we're putting our kids here, we're deforming them. How do you raise a sacred human?
Yes.
How do you enter sacred relationships?
We do predicate our children. We do. We say, you are sweet, you are good, you are this. And that's a predication and deforming them. But I'm so glad you went back to this, because Matt ends up here feeling that interconnectedness and oneness and flow as he dances around the world. So let's watch the video, and if the spirit moves you as you're watching the video, feel free to stand up and move. And thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience and listening.
For
man who only played video games is now in communication with like 20,000 emails a day around the world getting invitations to come dance with him. It's just really awesome. So thank you very much. And we'll be around for questions and comments. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next door for lunch.